So, you've seen this cool looking Lovecraftian steampunk zombie western card game called Doomtown, and you're thinking to yourself, okay, well, the theme is cool, but how does it play? Well, let's take a look. In Doomtown, each player takes control of a gang vying for control of the titular Doomtown. For the past 20 years or so, this has been a small fictional mining town in California called Gomorrah. In more recent expansions, though, the action has moved on to the town Too Tough to Die, and we're centered on Tombstone, Arizona. Regardless of where you're at, you'll be taking control of either the Law Dogs, seekers of justice in a lawless frontier, the Sloan Gang, outlaw bandits out for bloodshed and chaos, the Morgan Cattle Company, steampunk entrepreneurs with more money than sense, or the Fourth Ring, a group of fear-mongering servants of the dark powers disguised as a circus troupe. If you pick up the expansions, you might also have the opportunity to try the 108 Righteous Bandits, anarchist Robin Hoods made up mostly of Chinese immigrants, or the Eagle Wardens, a group of First Peoples and other spiritualists looking to rid the land of evil. Once you've chosen a faction to play, you'll take that faction's outfit card. Today, we'll be pitting the heroic Law Dogs against the villainous Fourth Ring. In expansion sets, each faction will gain access to additional outfit cards with different effects. But for now, we're focusing exclusively on the core set. Now, what are all these other cards? First off, we have dudes. These are the characters that will be fighting for control of the town, and they're easy to spot by the fact that in the upper left corner, where each card has a poker value, dudes are all going to be spades. Diamonds are for deeds, the locations your characters will be fighting over. Hearts are goods and spells, things that attach to other cards, usually your own dudes, to affect them in some way. And clubs are actions, cards that generally have an effect and are then discarded. The only other cards you'll be seeing are jokers. We'll talk a little bit more about them later. After you've chosen your outfit cards, the next thing to do is to decide on your starting posse. This will be a group of up to 5 dudes who are either part of your chosen faction or are drifters, which is to say like neutral characters. And they all must have a combined cost located in the bottom left corner of the card equal to or less than your outfit card's starting Ghost Rock. Ghost Rock is your money in this game. Any Ghost Rock from your starting amount that you don't spend on your starting dudes carries over into the first turn, so it's a good idea to leave yourself a little coin to play around with. This is a good time to mention how you win this game. Doomtown is a struggle for control of the very soul of the town, both literally and metaphorically. And so your objective is to, at the end of any given game round, have more control points, represented by blue poker chips and usually found on deeds, than your opponent has influence points, represented by red poker chips and usually found on dudes. The idea behind this is that it doesn't always matter who controls the most real estate in the town if a rival gang still has a lot of influence and is still hanging out in the local saloons or loitering in the town square. So you can win at the end of a turn if you increase your own control more quickly than an opponent's influence can keep up with, or if you're able to reduce your opponent's influence below your own control points, usually by filling that influence full of lead. Now let's take a look at our starting posses. The Law Dogs are starting with a full contingent of 5 dudes: Tommy Harden, Philip Swinford, Lucy Clover, Clementine Lepp, and Travis Moon. These dudes cost a combined total of 15 Ghost Rock, leaving the Law Dogs player with 4 remaining in their stash. The Fourth Ring, on the other hand, chose to start the game with 4 dudes: Micah Rise, Steel Archer, Clementine Lepp, and Travis Moon. These dudes also add up to 15, and since the starting Ghost Rock for both players was 19 in this case, that leaves the Fourth Ring with 4 Ghost Rock, just like the Law Dogs. Now, a couple of things to note about these posses. First off, you may have noticed that Clementine and Travis seem to be a bit confused as to their allegiances. Generally, all dudes and deeds in this game represent specific people and places in the Deadlands universe, and so they're considered unique, which means you can't have more than one copy of them in play. That being said, that uniqueness only extends to each player. So if you and your opponent both want to play copies of Jackson Strike or of Travis Moon, you're absolutely allowed to do that. And when we're just using the core set, you're going to see a lot of old Travis. The reason for this is because Travis is a grifter, noted here in his card text. A grifter is a special type of dude that you can only include one of in your starting posse, and these guys usually have effects that allow you to manipulate your opening hand of cards. Travis is the only grifter in the core set, although many more have been released since then, and his ability allows you to shuffle your hand into your deck and draw 5 new cards at the beginning of the game. Veteran card sharps will recognize this as essentially the same as the mulligan rule that shows up in many popular games like Magic the Gathering, Pokemon, and Legend of the Five Rings. The cool thing about grifters is they allow for all sorts of different mulligan-like effects. Now, there's 2 other things to talk about with these starting posses before we get down to what you can do in a turn. The first is their influence. Since influence is the thing that keeps your opponent from winning the game, you want to make sure that you start with as much as possible. Too low, and your opponent can score an early victory simply by playing a few deeds out. The Law Dog's starting posse has 5 influence, and the 4th ring has 4, although Clementine's ability allows her to nab an extra influence point while she's at a saloon, so both of them will potentially have access to that. Personally, I've always found that 5 is a very good influence number to shoot for. 4 is perfectly acceptable as well, although it is slightly riskier. The last thing to look at with these guys is upkeep. In the bottom right of each dude is their upkeep value. A lot of dudes in the game will have a 0 upkeep. These guys are great. They're the ones that are no trouble, they do their job, they don't really require any special handling. But then you've got dudes like Steel here. Steel has himself a little bit of a gambling problem, and so he's got an upkeep value of 1. What this means is that after you collect all your Ghost Drop production each turn, you're going to have to pay the upkeep value for any dudes that have 1 if you want to keep them working for you. Each outfit that's been printed so far has a production of 3 Ghost Drop, so that's what you'll be producing on the very first turn of the game. This means that the absolute maximum upkeep you can have in your starting posse without having to let some of them go before the game even starts is 3. And if you were to do that, you won't be producing any extra Ghost Rock to start building your presence in the town. For this reason, I don't ever like to start with more than 1 upkeep in my starting posse. Now after you've decided on your starting posse and shuffled your decks, it's time to draw your opening hand of 5 cards. Then you and your opponent will both utilize any grifter effects you have available to you, and then you're ready to start the game. Now let's break down what a turn looks like from dawn until dusk. The first stage of the turn is the gambling phase. Both players will ante up 1 Ghost Rock from their stash. If you're flat broke, you can borrow 1 from the bank, but you'll have to pay it back during the production phase before you do anything else. Once you've anteed up, both players will set aside their play hands that they just drew and draw a new hand of 5 cards. Now for the most part, nothing matters about these cards except for the poker suit and value in the upper left. These are called lowball hands. Because you're playing a hand of lowball poker, that means you're looking for the worst possible poker hand. Whichever player has the worst hand takes the pot and is considered the winner for the turn. This means that player will act first in the noon phase and also in any shootouts that occur. Up to a certain point, poker hand ranks in this game are the same as you're used to, but you have 11 ranks instead of the usual 10, and instead of Royal Flush taking the 10th spot, that honor goes to 5 of a kind. Not possible with a normal poker deck, but the customizable nature of this game makes it extremely possible. And the 11th rank is none other than the famous Dead Man's Hand, which for the purposes of this game is aces and 8s with a jack of diamonds. Exactly. After you've finished up the gambling phase, you'll move on to the production phase. For this step, both players will total up all the production of locations they own and control, and collect that much Ghost Rock from the bank. Then, after paying back anything they borrowed from the bank during the gambling phase, each player has to either pay the upkeep value listed on any dudes they have in play, or discard them. Once you've done that, you're ready to move on to the noon phase, which is where all the meat of the game occurs. In the noon phase, players will alternate taking actions, starting with the lowball winner, until both players pass consecutively. There are 5 different types of actions you can take: movin', shoppin', actin', calling somebody out, and passin'. Now let's talk about those in order, starting with by far the most important, which is movement. Now, despite the fact that poker is such a big part of this game, you really can't apply a poker mindset to it like you can with games like Magic the Gathering. Doomtown has much more in common with games like chess or Go, and nowhere is this more evident than in movement. When you take a movement action, you can move any one of your dudes from the location they're currently in to any other location currently in the game by booting them. To boot a dude, turn the card 90 degrees to denote that it's been used for this turn, and isn't available to do much else. This is very similar to tapping a card in Magic, bowing it in Legend of the Five Rings, or any number of other variations across many different card games. If you have to boot your dudes every time they move somewhere, which a booted dude can't make another move later on in the turn, that's one of many things that they're not allowed to do, that's going to make for a very slow-paced game. Luckily, they've already got you covered for that. There's two different ways that you can make free moves. Free moves don't require your dudes to boot. And those moves are from your home, which is the location represented by your outfit card, to an adjacent location. Adjacent locations are locations to either side of your home, or the town square. The town square is a central area accessible to both players, which is adjacent to all other areas in town. So the first free move is from your home to an adjacent location to either side or the town square, and the second type of free move is from the town square to any adjacent location, which, as I just said, the town square is adjacent to all locations in town. The only exception to this is you can't move from the town square back to your own home without booting. Moving back to your own home is always going to require you to boot, unless you have some kind of card effect. Speaking of card effects, since movement is such a huge part of this game, there's a lot of different card effects, such as horses that can be attached to your dudes, spells that allow them to move more quickly, all sorts of different stuff that allows your dudes to gain extra movement, whether as part of a shootout or as a noon action outside of a shootout. While it may seem kind of perfunctory at first, movement is absolutely the heart of this game. More than anything else, more than shootouts, more than any of that, this is a game of area control and making sure that you control your territory, and if possible, controlling your opponent's territory as well. This is a very chess-like game of outmaneuvering before outshooting. It's not to say that shooting's not important, but a lot of the mistakes that first-time players make in this game is discounting the movement part of the turn. Now, let's move on to talking about shopping. Shopping is playing a card from your hand. So that's dudes, deeds, goods, or spells. Things that stay on the board once you've played them. And they all get played in the same way, because every card, short of jokers, has a ghost rock cost in the lower left corner of the card, represented by the little coin symbol. Dudes, when you play them, you pay their ghost rock cost, and you play them down to your home, unless you have a card effect that says otherwise. That's just a general rule for all card games. It's a good thing to keep in mind. The cards can always break any given rules that you have. But you play dudes down to your home, and from there they can immediately begin taking actions on your next noon turn. Deeds are played down on your street, which is to the left and right of your home, on either side. Now, you cannot insert a deed in between two other deeds that already exist. You have to build onto the edges of your street. Goods and spells are played onto unbooted dudes at a location you control. Dudes always have to be unbooted in order to receive cards. No matter what, in order to receive a card, dudes always have to be unbooted. Fred can't be all tuckered out and still go shopping for himself a fancy new hat. Now that covers shopping, so let's move on to the third thing that you can do during your noon turn, which is acting. You'll notice on a lot of your cards, they will have abilities that start with noon in bolded text. Could be noon job or noon boot. These things are things that you can do as your noon turn. So, for instance, let's say an action card that said noon boot in bold text at the beginning. You could play that card as your noon turn. You would have to boot the dude or deed or whatever it is that it is targeting, but then you would resolve the effect on the card. Then you would at that point pass the noon turn back to your opponent. Once they did their thing, it would be back to you again. Really, acting is entirely dependent on the cards that you play, so there's really not a whole lot more to say about it. Now, let's get on to what everybody's been waiting for, and let's talk about shootouts. Calling somebody out is the fourth action that you can take. And there's a lot of different steps to this, so just bear with me. It becomes second nature before too long. When you want to call somebody out, issuing the call-out must be in the same location as the mark, or the dude you are calling out. If the mark is unbooted, then your opponent has the option of either accepting the call-out or sending their dude home booted. In other words, a ready dude can run home with their tail between their legs. Of course, while that's certainly the yellow thing to do, it's not always a bad tactical decision. If the mark is booted when the call-out is issued, though, there's no choice. The mark has to accept the call-out. Once the call-out has been accepted, the leader, that's the dude who issued the call-out, forms their posse. Any dudes who are present at the location of the impending shootout can join the leader's posse for free. Any dudes who are adjacent to the location can also join the posse, but they must boot to do so they have to be unbooted beforehand. After the leader has formed their posse, the mark also forms a posse using the same rules. So dudes that are at the location can join for free, adjacent dudes must boot to join in. So now you've got your posses, let's move on to shootout actions. Now we talked a minute ago about noon actions on cards, where the text is bolded to indicate when you would use the card. Shootout actions are the same way. Anytime you see the word shootout in bold text on a card followed by a colon, that's a shootout ability. Starting with the lowball winner, both players have the opportunity to play shootout abilities now until both of them pass. If shootout abilities cause one posse or the other to consist of 0 dudes, well then the shootout's over before it started. After both players pass on shootout actions, though, it's time to determine firepower. Let's talk about those big shiny bullet icons on all of your dude cards. These are the character's bullet rating, and they come in 2 types. Brass bullets represent draws, and silver bullets represent studs. Draws allow you to discard cards from your shootout hand and then redraw them, while studs allow you to draw extra cards into your shootout hand before discarding down. Each player will choose one dude from their posse to be their shooter. This dude applies their full bullet rating to the shootout. Each other dude in the posse contributes 1 bullet of their type. So for instance, a character like Clementine, who is a 0 draw, when she's acting as a support character in a shootout, will still contribute 1 bullet. Now after you've determined your shooters and come up with the total bullet value of your posse, each player will draw a shootout hand of 5 cards. Once you have your initial 5, then you'll apply your stud bonuses by drawing extra cards, and finally you'll apply draw bonuses by discarding cards and redrawing. Now it's important to note here that you can only use draw bonuses once, no matter how many characters are providing a draw bonus. So for instance, if your posse has a 3 draw rating due to 3 characters with a draw bonus supporting, you can choose whether to discard 1, 2, or 3 cards and redraw that many, but you can't discard 1 card, redraw, discard another, etc. It can only be done one time. After you've applied all of your bullet bonuses, you'll discard down to a 5-card poker hand, and it's time to read 'em and weep. Both players will reveal their hands and determine the hand rank of each player. The player with the higher hand rank is the winner in this round of the shootout, and the difference in hand ranks determines how many casualties the loser takes. For instance, if one player reveals a full house and the other player reveals 3 of a kind, that would be a difference of 3 hand ranks, which would result in 3 casualties. When applying casualties to your dudes, 1 casualty will cause a dude to be discarded, while 2 casualties will cause them to be aced. A card that is aced goes to your boot hill and will never be reshuffled back into your deck. Once you have begun applying casualties to a dude, you must continue doing so until you no longer can. So, for instance, you can't take 3 casualties by discarding 3 dudes. If you have 3 dudes and you take 3 casualties, one of them is aced, another is discarded, and the last one is left standing. Now, after you've applied casualties, the loser of the shootout round decides whether or not they want to turn tail and flee. If all hope is lost, that player can send all their dudes home booted, even if they're already booted. At this point, the shootout is over, and play passes to whoever the next player in the noon phase would be. If the loser chooses to stick around, then the winner also has a chance to turn tail and run. Maybe they accomplish what they set out to do, maybe a powerful spell or shootout effect is about to wear off. Whatever the reason, winners too have the option to retreat. That being said, if neither side chooses to retreat, and both sides still have at least 1 dude in them, it's time to start the whole process over again, starting with shootout actions. Now, I know this is a lot to take in, but I promise it will make a lot more sense here in a few minutes when you get to see all of this in action. The last type of action you can take in a turn is passing. This one's pretty self-explanatory, although it is worth mentioning that you can pass, but still take additional actions later in the round, as long as your opponent doesn't also pass, thereby triggering the start of the Nightfall phase. Speaking of Nightfall, let's talk about what happens. Once both players pass consecutively in the Noon phase, any end-of-round effects are triggered. Each player has the option to discard a card from their play hand, then refills their play hand back to 5 cards. And then this is where we check to see if anybody's won the game. Count up your control points and your influence points, and if either side has fulfilled the victory condition, the game's over. If not, it's time to mosey on back to the gambling phase. Now, we've got just a couple more things to talk about before we proceed on to the example turn. One is jokers. These handsome cards can't be used if they show up in your play hand. You'll have to discard them at some point. However, if they show up in a draw hand, you can choose any suit and value for them. But after use, they're aced. These can be extremely powerful in shootouts, but you can include 2 of them in any deck on top of the 52 cards you start with. Another thing to mention is skill checks. These are used for spells and gadgets. To play a spell or a gadget onto a dude, that dude must have the requisite skill. Mad Scientist for gadgets, Hucksters for spells. In later expansions, more skill keywords were added, but those 2 are all we have to worry about for right now. When making a skill check, you make what's called a pull. Discard the top card of your deck and add its poker value to your dude's skill. Then compare it to the difficulty of the card you're trying to use. Gadgets require a skill check when they're played in order to invent them. This boots the mad scientist who does so, regardless of whether the attempt is successful. Whereas spells can be played without a skill check, but require one to be made anytime the spell is cast. If the skill check meets or exceeds the difficulty rating on the card, the check is successful, and the gadget is invented or the spell is cast. If not, then the check is unsuccessful and the gadget is discarded. You still have to pay its cost, or the spell fizzles. One final note. You may have noticed that there's a lot of draw hands and pulls causing you to run through your deck pretty quickly. If you ever need to draw more cards than you have remaining in your deck, simply draw as many as you can and then reshuffle your deck, finishing drawing your cards after you've done so. Now, I know you're reeling from all the theory, but now let's try putting this all into practice. So here at the start of the game, we've got both players set up and ready to draw their opening hands. The Law Dogs player draws a Pistol Whip, Andreas Andreg, a Joker, a Bounty Hunter, and a Quick Draw Handgun. Because he has no deeds in hand to start accelerating his production, and because of the Joker, which is a dead card in the play hand, he decides to activate Travis Moon's ability, booting him and drawing a new hand of 5 cards. The Law Dog's new hand consists of Stephen Wiles, Charlie's Place, The Stakes Just Rose, Jackson's Strike, and another Stephen Wiles. Meanwhile, the 4th ring player draws a Blood Curse, Hexslingen, Undertaker, A Coach Comes to Town, and Ivor Hawley. The Undertaker is a good deed, and Blood Curse is a powerful spell, so she decides to keep this hand. Now starts the gambling phase. Both players ante up a single Ghost Rock from their stash, and will now set aside their play hands for the moment and draw lowball hands. The Law Dogs player draws a 5 of Hearts, 3 of Clubs, 2 of Clubs, 5 of Clubs, and a 3 of Spades, giving him 2 pair. The 4th ring player draws a 10 of Diamonds, a 10 of Spades, another 10 of Diamonds, an Ace of Hearts, and a 9 of Clubs. 2 of the same suit and value in her hand means the 4th ring player is cheatin'. Now there's nothing inherently wrong with laying down a cheatin' hand, this is the Wild West after all, but there's a number of different effects that can trigger off of cheating hands, most of which will harm you or help your opponent. In this case, the Law Dogs player chooses to activate Philip Swinford's ability. Since the 4th ring laid down an illegal hand, the Law Dogs get to discard a card from their play hand and draw a new one. Since he can't have 2 out at the same time, the Law Dogs choose to discard a Stephen Wiles, replacing it with Bottom Dealin'. Additionally, since the 4th ring had 3 of a kind to the Law Dogs' 2 pair, the Law Dogs win the lowball hand, collect the pot, and will act first this round. Now we move to the production phase. Since it's the first turn, both players only have their homes in play. They both produce 3 Ghost Rock, and they both have an upkeep of 1, so they both have a net gain of 2 Ghost Rock added to their stash. Here we start the noon phase, and since the Law Dogs player won lowball, he gets to take the first action. He chooses to take a shopping action, playing the deed Charlie's Place down next to his home, and spending 3 Ghost Rock. Play then passes to the 4th ring player, who also takes a shopping action, playing the Undertaker to her street for 4 Ghost Rock. For his second play, the Law Dogs player chooses to play another deed, but Jackson's Strike is a bit different. Since it's marked out of town, it's placed away from the other deeds. Out of town locations aren't adjacent to anything, even other out of town deeds, so they're very difficult to move to and from. The fourth ring player takes another shopping action, this time choosing to play a spell, Blood Curse, on Steel Archer, her main huckster. The Law Dogs take the initiative, moving Tommy Harden out to the town square. The fourth ring then follows suit, moving Travis Moon to the square. The Law Dogs take the opportunity to move Clementine Lepp over to Charlie's place, since while she's there, she gains an influence and cannot be called out. The fourth ring player then moves Steel to the town square, followed by the Law Dogs moving Lucy to the town square. The forces are amassing. The fourth ring player plays A Coach Comes to Town from her hand, which is a special type of action called a job. Starting a job is a little like calling someone out, only the mark isn't necessarily another dude. In this case, the mark is the town square, and the fourth ring player will form a posse just as they would in a shootout to go after it. The difference here is that the leader of the job doesn't have to be in the same place as the mark, and other unbooted dudes who are at the same location as or adjacent to either the leader or the mark can boot to join the posse. Only dudes who are already at the same location as the mark do not have to boot and can join if already booted. In this case, Steel and Travis are the fourth ring posse and they're already in the square, so no one needs to boot. The Law Dogs player will have to choose whether or not they want to oppose the job, which typically leads to a shootout. If no one opposes a job, follow the text on the card to see what happens when you succeed, then everyone who was part of a job posse goes home booted. In this case, the Law Dogs will oppose the job with Tommy and Lucy since they're already in the town square. If they weren't, they could boot in from an adjacent location, just like with a normal shootout. Now that we know it's a fight for life, and posses have been formed, we move on to shootout actions. As the lowball winner, the Law Dogs have the first opportunity to take an action, and he plays The Stakes Just Rose from hand, which allows him to move Travis Moon into the shootout, even though Travis is already booted. The fourth ring player had been planning on casting a Blood Curse on Tommy, but since Travis has a higher bullet rating, Steel turns his attention to the newcomer and attempts to cast the Blood Curse, booting the card. The pull is a Queen of Diamonds, which is higher than the skill check of 9 on the card, even before adding Steel's Huckster skill of 2, so the spell is successful, and Travis receives -2 bullets, making him a 0 draw. Since she successfully cast a spell outside her home, the fourth ring player gets to use the ability on her home card. She boots the card, gains 1 Ghost Rock, and gets to discard and replace a card from her play hand. She discards Ivor Hawley, since he's so expensive, and draws Unprepared, a very powerful action card. Both players now pass consecutively on shootout actions, which leaves the Law Dogs at a 1 stud, 2 draw, and the fourth ring at a 0 stud, 3 draw. The Law Dogs player draws 6 cards due to his 1 stud bonus, a 5 of spades, 4 of clubs, 3 of hearts, 3 of diamonds, 3 of clubs, and 8 of hearts. He can discard up to 2 cards with his draw bonus, but chooses to only discard the 8 of hearts, drawing an 8 of diamonds in its place. Since 3 of a kind is the best hand he can make, he decides to discard the 4 of clubs to make a legal 5-card hand. The fourth ring player draws a Queen of Spades, Queen of Hearts, another Queen of Spades, a 9 of clubs, and a Jack of Spades. She can discard and redraw up to 3 cards, but she chooses to drop 2 in the hopes of drawing more queens. She draws a Queen of Diamonds and a 10 of Hearts, giving her a cheating 4 of a kind. Both players lay down their hands, with the Law Dogs showing a rank 4 and the fourth ring showing rank 8. Since the fourth ring player was cheating, and the Law Dog's hand was not, Tommy Harden's ability triggers, raising the hand rank of the Law Dogs by 2 to 6. Lucy Clover's ability also triggers, giving Steel and Travis both 1 bounty. When characters have bounty attached to them, simply place a Ghost Rock token on them, and if that character is ever discarded or aced, the player who did so collects the bounty. Certain dudes, many of them members of the Sloan Gang, have abilities that trigger off of accruing large prices on their heads. In addition to the abilities, the Law Dogs player also has a Cheatin' resolution effect in hand, Bottom Dealin'. This causes the Cheatin' player's hand to be discarded and replaced with the top 5 cards of your deck. So the Law Dogs player draws a new shootout hand for the fourth ring, a Joker, an 8 of clubs, a King of clubs, a 5 of hearts, and a 5 of clubs. The best she can do with that is 3 of a kind, which is rank 4. The fourth ring player still has a resolution effect of her own though, and plays Hexslingen from her hand. Hexslingen raises her draw hand rank by 2, but forces her to discard a hex from play. Since Blood Curse is her only option, she discards it to increase her hand rank to 6. With both players' ranks now tied at 6, both players will take 1 casualty, and both decide to discard Travis Moon due to his having 0 influence. Since the 4th ring version of Travis has a bounty on him, the Law Dogs player collects 1 Ghost Rock. All the shootout hands are now discarded, except for the Law Dogs Joker, which is aced, even though he wasn't the one to use it. Since Steel is now outgunned, the 4th ring player decides it's not worth the risk of extending the shootout and sends him home booted. Since the shootout is over, and the 4th ring no longer has any dudes present at the shootout, the job is successfully opposed, which in this case grants the Law Dogs 4 Ghost Rock. All of that, and we're now back to the noon phase, where the Law Dogs get to take the next action. He plays Stephen Wiles from hand, a powerful dude who only costs 1 Ghost Rock, but has an upkeep of 6, so is typically only used for a single turn. The 4th ring player passes, having nothing else to really do at the moment. The Law Dogs player moves Stephen to the town square. The 4th ring then passes again. The Law Dogs now move Stephen Wiles to the Undertaker. Since Stephen has more than 0 influence, he now takes control of the deed, which grants the Law Dogs the 2 control points from the Undertaker. Although the Law Dogs will not also gain its production, they only deny that to the 4th ring. Even though the change in control points wouldn't end the game, the 4th ring player has had enough of being walked on, and sends Micah Rise to the Undertaker, not for revenge, but for a reckoning. Feeling confident, the Law Dogs player has Stephen call out Micah, to which Micah accepts. Neither player decides to add additional dudes to their posse, making this a one-on-one fight. Since the Undertaker has the private keyword and is owned by the 4th ring player, any opposing dudes present in a shootout there, in this case Stephen, will get a bounty placed on them. With an empty hand, the Law Dogs player passes his first shootout action. The 4th ring player plays Unprepared from hand, which boots Stephen and causes him to lose 1 bullet. Both players pass their remaining shootout actions, which leaves the Law Dogs at a 2 stud and the 4th ring at a 0 stud. Since he isn't in support, Micah's 0 bullet rating doesn't help him in this fight, and he's entirely reliant on Lady Luck. The Law Dogs player draws a 4 of spades, 4 of clubs, 8 of hearts, 3 of diamonds, 3 of spades, 3 of hearts, and 5 of clubs. Since he must make a 5-card hand, he discards the 8 and the 5 to make a full house of 3s and 4s. The 4th ring player draws a joker, a jack of spades, a jack of clubs, a jack of diamonds, and a jack of hearts. An amazing draw in just 5 cards, this is the only way in the game to get a non-cheating 5 of a kind. Both players lay their hands down, with the Law Dogs showing rank 7 and the 4th ring showing rank 10. With 3 ranks of difference, the Law Dogs are forced to ace Stephen, which means that not only is he gone, no further copies of him can be played for the entire game. Both shootout hands are discarded, the 4th ring's joker being aced. The 4th ring collects a bounty from killing Stephen, and also collects 2 Ghost Rock from the Undertaker since a dude was aced. The 4th ring player passes her next noon action, as does the Law Dogs player. At nightfall, the 4th ring has 2 control points to the Law Dogs' 6 influence, and the Law Dogs have 1 control point to the 4th ring's 4 influence, so neither side has won yet. Since both players' hands are empty, they both draw entirely new 5-card play hands, before starting the round over at the gambling phase. And there you have it, folks, a full turn with as much information crammed in as I could manage. If you still have any questions, be sure and check out www.pineboxentertainment.com, where you can find resources like the most current rulebook and FAQ documents, and the Doomtown Facebook group, a super active and helpful community that is always welcoming to greenhorns learning the ropes. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'd like to personally welcome you to the community for my all-time favorite card game, Doomtown.